the beating that inspired the song Motown tried to kill. 10 songs, 10 decisions, and one question running through all of them. What does a record label do when the truth arrives louder than the label can manage? This is a list about suppression, about the space between what the music deserved and what the institution was willing to allow. And at the end of this list, there is one name and one song and one man who watched police open fire on protesters in the streets of Berkeley, California, and wrote something and brought it to the most powerful R&B label in the world. And the man who ran that label called it the worst record he had ever heard. Number 10, the Marvelettes. Before I tell you what Motown did to these women, I need to tell you what these women did for Motown. In the autumn of 1961, 5 young women from Inkster, Michigan, a small town outside Detroit that most people have never heard of, walked into Hitsville, USA with a song. Their names were Gladys Horton, Wanda Young, Katherine Anderson, Georgiana Tillman, and Juanita Cowart. They called themselves the Marvelettes. They were teenagers. Please, Mr. Postman was released in October of 1961. By December, it was number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, Motown's first number 1 single on the pop chart. The very first. Hold that for a moment. Without that moment, without those 5 women and that song, there is no Motown crossover. There is no empire. The entire architecture of what Berry Gordy built in the 1960s begins right there, with the Marvelettes opening a door that had never been opened before. And then the label made a decision, and it changed everything. As the Supremes began their ascent in 1964, the resources migrated. Holland Dozier Holland, the premium writers, moved toward Diana Ross and her group. The Marvelettes continued to record. They continued to chart. But they were no longer the priority. And in this industry, you feel when you are no longer the priority. You feel it in the sessions you're given, in the promotion budget, in which names appear on magazine covers. By 1969, they were gone. No farewell, no acknowledgement of what they had opened, no ceremony from the label they had handed its first number 1. If this name was in your house growing up, you already understand what I'm saying. Number 9, Mary Wells. Let me tell you who Mary Wells was, not what the charts say, who she was. She was the first. Before Diana Ross became Diana Ross, before Motown's female presence became a commercial force on the pop landscape, there was a teenager from Detroit with a voice that sounded like certainty. Like she already knew where the melody was going, and she was taking you there whether you were ready or not. In May of 1964, My Guy reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 1 on the R&B chart. And in that specific, crystalline moment, Mary Wells was the most commercially successful female recording artist on the label. And then the label made a decision. Actually, Mary Wells made a decision. On her 21st birthday in 1964, she exercised the legal right in her contract to void it and leave Motown. She walked out. And Motown kept everything she had built: her masters, her recordings, the commercial infrastructure her voice had made possible. All of it stayed at Hitsville. She left with her talent and almost nothing else. The next decade found her on 6 different record labels, artists who sounded like her, songs that chased the feelings she had already made. Never finding the radio again that Motown had handed her and then quietly taken back when she left. I need you to understand what that means in practical terms. In 1990, Mary Wells was diagnosed with cancer of the larynx. The disease took her voice, the exact instrument that had made everything possible. She had no health insurance. Her medical bills consumed her savings. She had to sell her home. And who stepped in? Not a record label, fellow musicians. Diana Ross gave $15,000. Rod Stewart, Bruce Springsteen, Bonnie Raitt, they contributed. The Rhythm and Blues Foundation raised funds so that Mary Wells could pay for her treatment and keep a roof over her head. She died on July 26, 1992, 49 years old. Motown's first superstar, gone, funded in her final years not by the institution she helped build, but by her peers. The music survived. The name did not receive what it was owed, and that is not the same thing. Real talk. Only 9% of you are subscribed. That hurts. We're spending hours digging through archives, fact-checking every detail, bringing these stories back to life. And if you're watching this far, you clearly care. So hit subscribe. It's free and takes 2 seconds. Now, to my subscribers, barely any of you have joined the membership. And honestly, that stings even more. You know the work we put in. You keep coming back. If these videos have ever made you feel something, if this music means something to you, join the membership. It's one coffee a month and it's the only way we keep this going. Let's build this together. All right, back to it. Number 8, Florence Ballard. I want to be deliberate about something before I go any further. Florence Ballard did not join the Supremes. Florence Ballard helped create the Supremes. She was there at the beginning, before the name, before the hits, before Berry Gordy decided that what this group needed was a different face at the front. She recruited. She was the original lead vocalist. She helped build from nothing what became Motown's most commercially successful act of all time. Ten #1 singles: Where Did Our Love Go?, Baby Love, Stop, In the Name of Love. Florence Ballard sang on 16 top 40 records with this group. She was present for all of it, on the stage, in the room, on the record. And then Berry Gordy decided that Diana Ross was the story he was going to tell, and he told it, at Florence's expense. In 1967, Ballard was removed from the Supremes and tried an unsuccessful solo career with ABC Records. The announcement came without ceremony. The settlement from Motown was modest, a number that did not reflect 10 #1 hits. She spent it, and then she had nothing. By the mid-1970s, Florence Ballard was on welfare in Detroit. In the city where she had sung on those hits, she was living on welfare when she died. In the city where her face had been on magazine covers and her voice had played from every radio. On February 22, 1976, Florence Ballard died of a heart attack. She was 32 years old. Some of you just went quiet. That is the right response. She deserved halls of fame with her name prominently placed while she was alive to see them. She deserved retrospectives. She deserved the kind of recognition that makes people understand what was built. What she received was an early death with no monument. This name deserves to be in your memory. After today, let it stay there. Number 7, the Funk Brothers. James Jamerson, Benny Benjamin, Joe Messina, Robert White, Earl Van Dyke, Richard Pistol Allen. You don't know those names. Most people don't. And that is one of the most deliberate, documented, and complete acts of erasure in the history of American popular music. These men were the house band at Hitsville, USA in Detroit. They played on virtually every Motown recording from 1959 to 1972. Every Supremes record, every Marvin Gaye record, every Four Tops record, every Temptations record, the bass line you hear in your memory right now, that was James Jamerson. The drum pattern that lives in your chest when a certain song comes on, that was Benny Benjamin. Jamerson played on 30 Billboard #1 pop singles, more than 70 R&B chart toppers, more than any other bass player in history, and he was the uncredited bassist on most of those recordings. Motown did not list session musician credits on their releases until 1971. Not once in 12 years. Not a name in the liner notes. Not a mention in the press. They were paid session fees at union scale. They received no royalties. They built the sound. The institution kept their names. Talent without documentation is just genius with no witnesses, and Motown made sure these men had neither. I will say clearly what most people won't. This was not an accident of the era. Other labels credited their session musicians. This was a decision Motown made. A sustained, deliberate decision that kept these men from building names that would have entitled them to residuals, to negotiating power, to the recognition that should have followed them the rest of their lives. James Jamerson died on August 2, 1983. He was 47 years old. Complications from cirrhosis of the liver. The Motown 25th anniversary television special had aired earlier that year. It had little to say about him and the other Funk brothers. The first time his name appeared on a major Motown album sleeve was in 1971, on the jacket of Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, where he was acknowledged as the incomparable James Jamerson. Number 6, Edwin Starr / War. Before I tell you about Edwin Starr, I need to tell you about a song that Berry Gordy tried to contain. War was written by Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong. Because of its blatant political message, Berry Gordy refused to release it as a single for the Temptations, who had originally recorded it for their 1970 album Psychedelic Shack. Let me be clear about what that means. Gordy had a song that said, directly and without apology, that war was destroying the people it claimed to be protecting. He had it on tape, he had it available, and he made the decision that the commercial consequences of attaching that message to the Temptations' name were too great. More than 4,000 students wrote to Motown asking for War to be released as a single or recorded by another artist. 4,000 letters to a record label asking for a song that was sitting in a vault. Motown head Berry Gordy had other plans for the Temptations and did not want them associated with such a controversial song. Starr had less of a fan base to offend, so the song was given to Edwin Starr. Edwin Starr recorded it on his own terms. He understood what the song needed to be, and he delivered it accordingly. Harder, more confrontational, more genuinely angry than the original. War hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on August 29, 1970, a position it held for 3 consecutive weeks. Edwin Starr gave everything to that performance. The label gave him a song that had been calculated as a manageable risk, handed to a smaller artist so the fallout, if any came, would cost less. He never had another record that reached those heights. What he gave to the song got. The label managed the rest accordingly. Number 5, Martha Reeves / Martha and the Vandellas. Let me tell you how Martha Reeves became a recording artist at Motown. She didn't come through an audition, she came through a door marked employment. She was hired as a secretary. She answered phones, she scheduled sessions, she filed paperwork. And one afternoon, when a session came up short, when the lead vocalist wasn't there, Martha stepped in and she sang Heat Wave, Nowhere to Run, Dancing in the Street, Jimmy Mack. These songs, and the voice behind them, should have made Martha Reeves one of the definitively celebrated women in the history of the label. She had the range, she had the instinct, she had the kind of authority in her singing that the best performances carry, the authority of someone who does not need to ask the room for permission, and Motown knew it. They had seen what happened in that session. Martha Reeves has spoken at length about what the following years actually looked like. Recording without proper contracts in the early period, financial arrangements that did not reflect the value of the work. Watching the label's full promotional infrastructure, the priority writers, the radio relationships, the cover stories, migrate toward other artists while the Vandellas were managed more tightly. Dancing in the Street, released in 1964, became one of the most recognizable songs in American music. It has been heard as a freedom song, a coded anthem for a country in the middle of a civil rights movement that needed its own music. Berry Gordy actively worked to distance Motown from that reading, to keep the song free of political association, to protect the label's commercial relationships. Whether Motown truly understood what they had standing in the next building and chose not to develop it fully, I think you already know the answer. Martha Reeves left Motown in 1974, She later ran for Detroit City Council. She won. She served 2 terms. Because the city the industry had used as a backdrop for its commercial ambitions, she decided to actually serve it. That is the kind of person the label had, and did not fully see. Number 4, Tammi Terrell. Her name was Thomasina Montgomery. She recorded under the name Tammi Terrell. She was one of the finest voices in the history of Motown's recording catalog, not as a supporting artist, as a lead. As the specific, irreplaceable sound that turned a series of duets with Marvin Gaye into something beyond formula, something that sounded like 2 people who had already reached an understanding about everything important and were now saying it together for the first time. Ain't no mountain high enough. Your precious love. Ain't nothing like the real thing. You're all I need to get by. What you hear in those recordings is conversation, not performance. 2 voices in complete understanding of each other. She was 23 years old. She was at the beginning of everything. On October 14, 1967, Tammi Terrell collapsed on stage during a performance in Virginia. She collapsed in Marvin Gaye's arms. She was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Over the next 2 years, she underwent 8 surgeries. She lived in tremendous pain. She tried to record when her body allowed. I need you to hold that for a moment. There are accounts, documented, debated, never fully resolved, suggesting that on some of her later Motown recordings, the voice you hear may not be entirely hers. That another vocalist was used when Tammy's condition made singing impossible. The label has denied this, but the question has never been put to rest. And the fact that the question exists at all tells you something about the relationship between this artist and this institution. Tammi Terrell died on March 16, 1970. She was 24 years old. Marvin Gaye did not recover from this loss in any simple way. He withdrew from performing. He closed the door, and in that grief, in the grief of a world at war with itself and with its own people, he reached for something he hadn't tried to say before. We will get there, and now you will understand why the song meant everything it meant. Number 3, Gladys Knight and the Pips. Gladys Knight joined Motown in 1966, along with her brother Merrill, her cousins William and Edward Patton, and Langston George, together known as the Pips. They were not a new act. Gladys Knight was not a discovery. She was an established artist who had been refining her craft since the 1950s. Her voice did not need development. It needed an audience. At Motown, they recorded, they charted. They were, from the label's perspective, reliable. In September of 1967, they released I Heard It Through the Grapevine, written by Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong. It reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 1 on the R&B chart for 6 weeks, and became the biggest-selling Motown single up to that point. And here is the part of this story I need you to understand precisely. Marvin Gaye had already recorded I Heard It Through the Grapevine earlier that year, and Berry Gordy had rejected it. He kept it in a vault, while Gladys Knight's version went out and proved the song was a hit, that it could cross over, that it could reach #1. And then, with that proof in hand, Gordy finally agreed to release Marvin Gaye's version in 1968. It went to the top of the Billboard Pop Singles chart for 7 weeks and became the biggest hit single in Motown history at the time. She proved the song could work, and then the label used that proof to launch another version that left hers behind. Some of you are going to look this up after this ends. Good! That is exactly the point. If you are wondering whether this pattern continued, whether Gladys Knight and the Pips were consistently treated as a resource rather than a priority at Motown, consider what happened the moment they left. They departed in 1973 for Buddha Records. Within months, Midnight Train to Georgia, #1 pop, #1 R&B, their signature song, followed immediately by I've Got to Use My Imagination and The Best Thing That Ever Happened to Me. Three of the defining moments in their entire catalog, all of them arriving immediately after Motown let them go. Everything they were capable of delivering, Motown was sitting on it, and the world only found out when they walked out the door. Number 2, Stevie Wonder. In May of 1971, Stevie Wonder turned 21 years old. And before the ink was dry on his adulthood, he told Berry Gordy something that most artists at Motown had never said out loud. He said, "I will not sign another contract unless it gives me complete creative control, ownership of my masters, authority over my publishing, the right to make the music I intend to make." I want to be precise about what I am saying here. This demand came from inside the label that had kept the Marvelettes, the Funk Brothers, Mary Wells, Florence Ballard, and every other artist in between on the correct side of a power arrangement that Motown controlled absolutely. And Stevie Wonder drew a line. Gordy said no, initially, and then came Superstition. In 1972, Stevie was working with guitarist Jeff Beck. Beck wanted a song. Stevie wrote Superstition, and the negotiations around that song, around which artist would release it first, and on what terms, and with whose name attached, became one of the defining standoffs in Motown's history. What Gordy was trying to preserve was the arrangement he was comfortable with. What Stevie was trying to preserve was ownership of his own work. Stevie's version was released in October of 1972. It reached #1 on the pop chart and #1 on the R&B chart. And then came the run. Music of My Mind, Talking Book, Inner Visions, Fulfillingness, First Finale, Songs in the Key of Life, 5 albums, 5 years, one of the most sustained periods of creative mastery in the history of recorded music in any genre. And I want you to ask yourself, looking at every name that came before this one, how many artists on this list could have done what Stevie Wonder did? How many had the leverage to draw that line and hold it? How many tried in their own way and couldn't? That is the story of what happens when an artist wins. Number 1, Marvin Gaye / What's Going On, The Beating. Let me tell you who Ronaldo Benson was before I tell you what he saw. He was the bass singer of the Four Tops, a man who had spent his life inside music, and in 1969, music was not enough. On May 15, 1969, Bloody Thursday, police opened fire on anti-war protesters at People's Park in Berkeley, California. Officers fired buckshot into an unarmed crowd. 1 person was killed. 128 were hospitalized. Obie Benson watched it happen. He asked, "What is happening here? Why are they attacking their own children in the streets?" He shaped what he witnessed into a melody with Al Cleveland. The Four Tops turned it down. He brought it to Marvin Gaye. You know this song. It has been part of your life for a long time. But knowing the song and knowing what it cost to make it, those are 2 different kinds of knowing. Let me give you the second one. Marvin Gaye was in grief. Tammi Terrell had died that March. And when Benson brought him this, Marvin heard not just the protest, but the grief itself. He rewrote it. He recorded it in a way Motown had never heard. He brought it to Berry Gordy. Gordy called it the worst record he had ever heard in his life. Too political, too far from the formula. He refused. Marvin told him, "Release this record, or I record nothing." The standoff lasted months. Then Motown's head of A&R had 100,000 copies pressed and shipped to stores, without Gordy's approval. I know, I felt the same way when I found this. The song reached number 1 on the R&B chart, number 2 pop. The album it anchored was ranked number 1 among the 500 greatest albums ever recorded. And the first time James Jamerson's name appeared on a Motown sleeve, after 12 years of uncredited work, was on that jacket. The Foundation, finally named, on the only album big enough to make it matter. That is what it cost to tell the truth at Motown.